The night sky above Earth was clear. Stars shined, and the world waited for their heroes to come home. Millions had watched the Apollo mission on television. Families sat together. Children pointed at the moon and whispered, "They are up there." Now the spacecraft was falling back through the dark, burning bright as it entered the atmosphere. Everyone expected joy, cheering crowds, and open arms. But the astronauts inside the capsule were not smiling. Their eyes were heavy, their bodies weak, and their voices low. They had seen something on the moon, something no human was ready to understand. They carried not only rocks and dust, but also a secret that pressed on their hearts. The capsule splashed into the ocean, and recovery teams rushed forward. Helicopters circled, ships cut across the waves, and divers jumped into the water. Normally, this was the moment of relief, but tonight it felt different. Soldiers stood on deck with serious faces, not with flags or flowers. When the astronauts were lifted onto the ship, no family was waiting. No music played, only silence and orders. One of the astronauts whispered, "Where is everyone?" But no one answered. Instead, men in black uniforms escorted them quickly. Their helmets and suits were removed in silence. Doctors checked them fast. The astronauts expected cheers, but instead, they saw cold eyes. The leader of the recovery team leaned close and said quietly, "You are being taken to a secure base. Do not speak." The words felt heavy, heavier than the moon itself. As the ship sailed, the astronauts sat together, their hands shaking. They remembered the last hours on the moon, the strange shadow moving on the ridge, the shining tower that stood where no tower should be. One astronaut had whispered in the lunar module, "Do not tell them. They will never let us go." Now his fears seemed true. After hours at sea, helicopters carried them away. They were not flown home, not flown to Houston. Instead, the pilot said nothing, only changed direction toward the desert. Through the small window, the astronauts saw sand stretching far. No city lights, no welcome signs. They landed at a base, surrounded by fences and guarded gates. The sign said nothing, but they already knew where they were. Area 51. The most secret place in America. The place whispered about in stories. The place where aliens were said to sleep in hidden rooms. Now, they were inside it, not as visitors, but as prisoners. The air was dry, the wind sharp, trucks rolled past with headlights dim. The astronauts were moved through tunnels. Underground, deeper and deeper, doors locked behind them, echoing like the sound of chains. One astronaut muttered, "This is not right. We are heroes, not prisoners." But the guards never answered. In a plain room with steel chairs, they were told to sit. A man in a gray suit entered, his face blank, his eyes like stone. He placed a file on the table, opened it slowly. Inside were photos they had taken on the moon. But these were not the same ones NASA showed the world. These were the hidden ones, the ones no one was supposed to see. The man tapped the photos and asked in a cold voice, "What did you really see up there?" The astronauts stayed silent. Their eyes dropped, their lips pressed shut. The man leaned closer. "You will tell us, because the world can never know." Outside the room, heavy footsteps echoed, doors clicked, machines hummed. It was clear. This was only the beginning. The astronauts had returned from the moon, but freedom had not returned with them. Instead, their journey had led them into a deeper darkness, a darkness hidden beneath the desert sand. And in that darkness, the truth waited, terrifying and alive. The desert night was cold. The wind carried dust across the ground, and the helicopters disappeared into the darkness. The astronauts stepped out of the vehicle that brought them from the landing strip, their legs unsteady, their eyes searching for answers. Ahead stood a wide steel gate, tall fences, and guards with rifles who did not smile. The words painted on the fence had been scratched away, but everyone knew what this place was. The gates opened slowly, the sound heavy, like chains dragging across stone. The astronauts were marched through without a word. Beyond the gate, floodlights shined on flat desert sand. But behind that brightness lay shadows. Large hangars rose like black mountains. There, doors closed tight. A faint hum in the air suggested machines hidden beneath the ground. This was not a base for celebration. This was a cage. One astronaut whispered, "Why here? Why not Houston?" Another muttered, "Because they do not want the world to see us." The guards gave no answers, their eyes forward, their hands gripping rifles. Only silence followed the questions, a silence that pressed against the astronauts' hearts. They were taken into a hangar, the door's ceiling shut behind them. Inside was darker than night. A cold smell of metal and fuel filled the air. The floor shook as if machines below were alive. A narrow elevator waited, its light red, its doors waiting, like a mouth. The astronauts exchanged glances, each face pale, each breath heavy. They entered. The doors closed, and the elevator sank deep into the earth. The ride seemed endless. Deeper and deeper it went. The air grew cooler. The walls vibrated, and the sound of machinery grew louder. One astronaut whispered, "We are not going down into a base. We are going down into a grave." No one laughed. No one denied it. When the doors opened, they found themselves in a long corridor of steel. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Cameras blinked in every corner. Armed guards lined the walls, each one silent, each one watching. The astronauts felt small, like children lost in a place built for giants. They were led into separate rooms, plain and cold, with a bed, a table, and nothing else. The locks clicked, the sound echoing like a warning. Hours passed with no food, no water, only the hum of machines through the walls. The astronauts tried to rest, but sleep would not come. Memories of the moon haunted them. Strange structure on the horizon, the shadow that seemed to move, the tower that glowed when no sunlight touched it. They whispered through the walls, voices low. "Do you think they know?" "Of course they know." "Then why ask us?" "Because they want to hear if we will lie the next morning." What felt like morning. For no sunlight reached underground. They were taken to an interrogation room. The walls were gray, the table steel, the air heavy with silence. A man in a black suit entered, his shoes clicking on the floor, his eyes sharp. He placed a recorder on the table and pressed a button. "Tell us," he said simply, "what did you see on the far side of the moon?" The astronauts shifted uncomfortably, their mouths dry. One finally spoke. "We saw rocks, craters, dust." The man leaned forward, his lips tightening. "Do not lie to me." He pulled out photographs, once taken by the astronauts, hidden. Camera. The images showed it clearly, an unnatural shape, sharp angles, towering over the lunar surface. Not a rock, not dust, but a structure. The astronauts' hearts froze. Their secret was not secret anymore. The man tapped the photo, his voice cold. "This is why you are here. This is why the gates locked behind you. This is why you will not see your families." He closed the folder slowly and leaned back. "You will remain here until we are certain you understand your duty." That night, as the astronauts sat in their rooms, the truth pressed on them heavier than gravity. They were not heroes anymore. They were witnesses, prisoners of knowledge. The gates had closed behind them, and freedom was not waiting outside. Instead, beyond the locked gates lay secrets buried deep under the desert. Secrets older than the moon itself, and in the distance, far down the underground corridors. One astronaut swore he heard something move. Not the sound of boots, not the sound of machines, but something else, something breathing. The corridor lights flickered as the astronauts were led to another room. Their steps echoed on the steel floor. Their hearts heavy, their minds racing. They did not know what waited for them. only that each door they passed seemed to hide more secrets. Finally, the guards stopped at a wide chamber, its walls lined with filing cabinets and glowing screens. On the table lay a box, metal and locked. The man in the black suit opened it slowly, as if revealing a treasure. Inside were reels of film, the very reels the astronauts had thought they had hidden. One of them whispered under his breath, "How did they find those?" But no one answered. The man placed the reels into a projector, and the room filled with the clicking sound of film spinning. On the wall appeared the images they had taken on the moon, images the world was never meant to see. At first, it was normal, the gray surface, the craters, the shadows, but then the truth appeared. A giant structure stood on the horizon, too perfect to be natural. Its sides rose like walls of glass, sharp and clean, shining faintly as if alive. Another image showed towers shaped like spires, tall and thin, arranged in a circle. The astronauts stared, their stomachs twisting, for they knew what they had seen, but to watch it again was unbearable. The man turned toward them, his face calm, his eyes cold. "These are not rocks," he said, his voice low. "These are not tricks of light." He paused, letting the silence fill the room. "Tell us, what else did you see?" The astronauts looked at each other, sweat forming on their brows. One finally whispered, "We saw movement." The man's eyebrow lifted. "Movement?" "Yes," the astronaut said, his voice shaking. "A shadow that shifted, even when no light was there. Something watching us. Something not human." The man wrote in his file without looking up. "Did it follow you?" he asked. Silence filled the room again. The astronauts glanced at one another, then lowered their heads. Finally, one of them nodded slowly. "Yes." The projector clicked to the next image. It showed a half-buried object, shaped like a ship, larger than a city block. Its surface was scarred, but its design was clear. It was not human technology. The astronauts gasped quietly, though they had seen it before. The man tapped a photo. "This," he said, "is why you were here." One astronaut whispered, "We were told to collect rocks, not to find this." Another muttered, "We never asked for this." The man's eyes hardened. "And yet you found it, and now you carry the burden." The reels ended. The images burned into their minds. The projector stopped with a final click. The silence in the room heavier than before. The astronauts sat frozen, their hands trembling on the table. The man closed the file and leaned closer, his words slow and sharp. "You will never speak of this to the world." The guards led them back to their rooms, but the images would not leave their minds. Each time they closed their eyes, they saw the spires, the glowing tower, the half-buried ship. They heard again the whispers of the moon's silence, the strange sound that seemed like breathing in. The shadows, the forbidden images, were now part of them, scars in their memory. Later that night, one astronaut could not stay silent. He whispered through the vent to the man in the next room, "What if this is not the first time?" The reply came back, shaky but true, "It is not." They both went quiet, their hearts pounding. 'Cause if Area 51 already had their hidden reels, then perhaps others before them had seen the same. Other missions, other astronauts, silenced, erased, forgotten. The truth was deeper than they had ever feared. Hours passed. The hum of machines grew louder. Then suddenly the lights in the corridor went out. Darkness swallowed the rooms. The vents filled with silence. From somewhere deep below, a sound rose, low and metallic. Not a machine, not human. One astronaut pressed his ear to the wall and whispered, "Something is down there." The forbidden images had shown the truth. But the astronauts began to realize the real secret of Area 51 was not just the photographs. It was what lay hidden far below their feet. Something alive, something waiting. And It had followed them back from the moon. Asterisk, the underground base was never quiet. Machines hummed, doors clicked, footsteps echoed. But on that night, the sound was different. It was not the heavy steps of guards, nor the steady rhythm of engines. It was softer, stranger, like something dragging across metal. The astronauts lay awake in their locked rooms, each one listening, their hearts beating fast. Fear crawled inside them because they had heard this kind of sound before. On the moon, the corridor outside flickered with light. Shadows stretched long and twisted. One astronaut sat up, his breath short. He whispered into the vent, "Do you hear it too?" From the next room came the reply, "Yes, it is moving closer." Silence followed, heavy and thick, broken only by the strange sound of claws against steel. Suddenly alarms screamed, red lights flashed, guards ran through the halls, shouting codes and orders. The astronauts pressed their ears to the doors, catching fragments of words. Containment breach, hangar 4. Not supposed to be awake. Fear twisted inside them. If something had escaped, then what exactly was being contained so deep in Area 51? The answer was worse than they imagined. Through the small vent, one astronaut saw a flash of movement. A figure passed the hall, tall, thin, its skin gray and shining under the red alarm lights. Its head was long, its eyes glowing faint white. It turned for a second, and even through the vent, the astronaut felt as if the creature's gaze pierced his soul. He pulled back, his whole body shaking, whispering, "It is not human." It followed us home. Guards shouted, their rifles fired. Bullets clanged against metal, but no screams came from the creature. Instead, a deep hum filled the air, as if the walls themselves vibrated. Lights burst, glass shattered, and doors slammed shut on their own. Akeem, the base was built to contain secrets, but now it seemed like the secret had taken control. In their locked rooms, the astronauts prayed for silence, but silence did not come. The sound of claws scraping steel grew louder, closer. Then suddenly, it stopped, right outside their doors. The air grew heavy, as if the walls themselves held their breath. One astronaut felt the cold sweep under the door, like fingers reaching for him. He whispered to himself, "Please go, please go." Minutes passed like hours. Then the footsteps moved away, fading into the distance. The alarms stopped, the red lights turned off, and normal white light returned. But nothing was normal, because they knew now this place was not just for hiding photos and films. It was for hiding living things. Things that should have never been brought to Earth. The next morning, the astronauts were taken from their rooms. The man in the black suit stood waiting, his expression flat, his voice sharp. "You will not speak of what you heard last night," he said. One astronaut asked, trembling, "What was that?" The man did not answer. He only repeated, "You will not speak of it." They were led past new corridors they had never seen before. Behind thick glass windows, they caught glimpses of strange shapes, bodies stored in tanks, machines humming with alien energy. Some looked dead, others looked asleep, but all of them looked wrong. The astronauts turned their faces away. But the images carved into their minds would never leave. In another chamber, a large craft rested under heavy lights. Its surface curved like no human design, marked with glowing lines. The astronauts stopped in their tracks, their mouths dry. It was the same design they had seen on the moon, the same half-buried ship. Now a piece of it sat here, deep beneath the desert, as if it had been waiting for centuries. The man in the suit noticed their fear and said coldly, "You were never the first to discover them." His words sliced through the air like a blade. The astronauts understood. Then this was not new. This was not their discovery. They were only the newest witnesses to a truth kept hidden for generations. That night, when they were locked away again, the astronauts could not sleep. Every shadow in their rooms looked alive. Every hum of machinery sounded like a breath. One whispered, "We should not have gone to the moon." Another whispered back, "No, we should not have come back." Far away, deep in the underground tunnels, the creature still moved. Its glowing eyes scanned the steel halls. Its claws left marks on the walls. It was patient, it was watching, and the astronauts realized something terrifying. They were not prisoners of men. They were prisoners of something far older, something that had already claimed the moon, and now had its claws inside Earth. The days inside Area 51 blended together. There was no sun, no moon, only white lights that never turned off. The astronauts lost count of time. They could not tell morning from night, and maybe that was the point. Every day, guards came and took them from their rooms, leading them down endless halls into rooms filled with machines. Here, the experiments began. Needles slid into their arms, taking blood again and again. Strange scanners moved across their heads, humming with low energy. Cold hands pressed against their chests, measuring heartbeats that jumped with fear. Doctors in masks wrote notes without speaking, their eyes hidden, their faces blank. The astronauts tried to ask questions, but every word was ignored. One astronaut whispered, "Why are they testing us so much?" The answer came from another, his voice shaking, "'Cause they think we brought something back." That thought froze the room, 'cause in their hearts they already knew it was true. Something had followed them from the moon, something invisible, something waiting. Days passed, and the experiments grew stranger. They were shown bright lights and asked to follow them with their eyes. They were asked to repeat words in languages they did not know. Sometimes they woke up strapped to beds, wires attached to their heads. Images flashed before their eye stars, towers, ships, symbols that burned into their minds, and each time they awoke, they remembered less of who they were and more of what they had seen on the moon. One night, one astronaut woke screaming, his voice echoing through the steel halls. Guards rushed in, doctors followed, but he pushed them back, shouting, "It is inside me. It is inside my head." His body shook, his eyes wide, sweat running down his face. Then, suddenly, he stopped, silent and still, his gaze empty. The doctors whispered to each other, their voices tight with fear. "The connection is active." The other astronauts heard everything through the vents. Their stomachs turned cold. They whispered to each other later, "What connection? What does that mean?" No one had the answer, but each of them felt the same thing. The dreams, the visions, the feeling of being watched. It was as if the moon itself had reached inside them and left a piece behind. The next morning, the man in the black suit came, his steps slow, his voice calm. "You are part of something greater now," he said. "Your bodies are only shells, but your minds carry doors. Doors we are trying to open." The astronauts stared at him in horror, but he did not blink. "You went farther than any man before you, and you brought back more than dust and rock." His words carried no warmth, only control. The experiments grew harsher after that. Electric currents pulsed through their bodies while machines measured their reactions. One astronaut began speaking in a voice not his own, deep and hollow. Another drew shapes on the walls with shaking hands, shapes that matched the structures on the moon. The doctors wrote notes faster, their faces pale, their hands trembling. They had studied strange things before, but never like this, never alive. At night, the astronauts whispered to each other, their voices low and broken. "What if we are not us anymore?" One said, "What if we are only the beginning of them?" Another answered. Silence followed, silence heavier than chains. In the days that came, they were shown the reels of forbidden images again, but this time, the doctors watched their eyes, their brainwaves, their heartbeats. They wanted to see if the astronauts remembered differently, and they did, because now the images were not only pictures, they were memories. One astronaut whispered, "I remember walking there, even though he never had. Another whispered, "It calls me back." The doctors exchanged terrified looks, but they did not stop. They kept the experiments going, pushing harder, digging deeper. The astronauts felt weaker each day. But inside their minds, something else grew stronger. Whispers that were not their own. Thoughts that came from somewhere far away. Voices that said, "You are not alone." That night, as the lights buzzed overhead and the corridors echoed with silence, one astronaut lay awake, his body trembling, his mind burning. And then he realized the truth. The experiments were not just tests. They were awakenings. The doctors were not studying them. They were unlocking them. And deep in his heart, he knew if the door inside him opened fully, it would not be him who walked out. It would be something else, something from the moon. And Earth would never be the same again. Asterisk, the astronauts could no longer sleep, their bodies weak, their minds burning with strange whispers every time they closed their eyes. They saw the moon, the towers, the ship buried in dust, and the glowing eyes of something waiting. The experiments had drained them, but fear gave them strength. They began to whisper to each other through the vents, planning something desperate. "We cannot stay here," one said, his voice trembling. "They will turn us into something we are not." Another replied, "We must escape tonight," whispered the third. The silence that followed was heavy, but then, slowly, each one agreed. That night, when the guards changed shift and the halls grew quiet, the astronauts made their move. One of them had hidden a piece of metal from the food tray, sharp enough to work on the lock. He pressed it into the door, twisting, forcing, his hands shaking with fear. The lock clicked. The sound soft but sharp in the silence. The door opened a crack, just enough. He slipped into the corridor. The white lights buzzing above. The cameras blinked red, but for the first time, luck was with them. The lens was cracked, blind. He motioned to the others, and one by one they stepped out. Their bodies were weak, but their eyes burned with fire. They moved quietly, sticking close to the wall. Every step echoed. Every sound felt too loud, but the guards were far at the end of the hall. They found a service door half open. Inside was a staircase leading both up and down. They hesitated, but the choice was. Clear up meant freedom. Down meant more secrets. They began to climb, each breath heavy, each heartbeat loud. But the deeper they moved into the base's hidden passages, the stranger things became. Behind one door, they found a room filled with glass tanks. Inside floated bodies, not human long heads, thin limbs, skin gray and stretched. Some were still, but others twitched as if dreaming. The astronauts pulled back in horror, their stomachs twisting. "This is what they hide," one whispered. "This is why the gates stay locked." They kept moving, their fear growing, but so did their determination. Ahead, they found a hangar. Massive and cold, inside rested a craft, alien in design. Glowing faintly with strange blue lines, the astronauts froze, their breaths shallow. It was the same as the ship they had seen on the moon, but whole, alive, humming with energy. One of them whispered, "They are not only keeping us prisoner, they are keeping it prisoner too." Suddenly, alarms began to blare. Red lights flashed. Across the hangar, the astronauts ducked behind crates, their hearts pounding. Guards shouted, boots thundered, but the sound that followed was worse. A deep hum filled the air. The same hum they had heard on the moon. The ship's surface pulsed with light, as if it had woken up. The astronauts clutched each other, whispering, "It knows we are here." The hangar shook, dust falling from the ceiling. Doors slammed shut, locking them inside. The astronauts ran to the far corner, searching for another way out. They found a narrow tunnel, half hidden behind machinery. Without thinking, they squeezed inside, crawling through the dark. The tunnel was tight, the air thick, but it was their only chance. They crawled for what felt like hours. The sound of alarms fading. Finally, they pushed open a grate and stepped into a corridor near the surface. Fresh air swept in through a vent. Dry desert wind. Freedom was close. They could almost feel it. One astronaut whispered, "Just a little farther." But then they heard it. The sound that haunted them. Claws scraping steel, slow and steady. They turned, and in the shadows at the end of the corridor, glowing eyes appeared. It had followed them, the same presence that had escaped the labs, the same presence that had watched them on the moon. Now, it blocked their path. The astronauts froze, their hearts racing. The creature stepped forward, tall and thin, its head tilting unnaturally. Its eyes glowed brighter. Its mouth opened, but no sound came. Instead, the astronauts felt its voice inside their heads. "Cannot leave." The words echoed, cold and sharp. "You are already mine." Terror filled them, but so did defiance. One astronaut grabbed a broken pipe from the floor, raising it like a weapon. Another picked up a fallen tool, his hands shaking but ready. They were weak, but they were human, and humans always fought when cornered. The creature's claws scraped the walls as it moved closer. The air grew colder. The lights flickered. The astronauts stepped back, but they refused to fall to their knees. One whispered, "If we die here, at least we die free." And in that moment, deep underground, with alarms, screaming, and the alien presence closing in, the astronauts realized the truth. Escape was not only about running from Area 51. It was about fighting for their humanity before it was taken forever. The corridor shook as the alarms wailed, the red lights flashed, and the alien presence moved closer. The astronauts stood shoulder to shoulder, weak and broken, but not ready to surrender. One held a pipe, another a tool, their makeshift weapons, small against something not of this world. The creature's glowing eyes locked on them, and once again its voice filled their minds. "You cannot leave. You belong to us now." The words burned inside their skulls, heavy like chains. One astronaut shouted back, "We are not yours," his voice trembling but strong. The creature tilted its head, as if curious. Then the hum in the walls grew louder. The lights flickered. The doors slammed shut. The whole base seemed alive. It was not only the creature, they realized the entire underground facility was connected to it. The ship, the tanks, the corridors. All of it tied to something older, deeper. The astronauts had only one choice. They ran. They pushed through the side tunnel, the sound of claws following close behind. Every step felt like a heartbeat of the earth itself, shaking and alive. They reached the stairwell, climbed fast, their lungs burning, their bodies weak. Behind them, the hum grew louder, closer. The alien presence did not chase with feet alone, pulled at their minds, dragging them back. At last, they burst into a wide chamber filled with officers, guards, and the man in the black suit. The alarms still screamed. Soldiers aimed rifles at the astronauts, not at the creature. The man's cold voice cut through the chaos. "Stop them. Do not let them leave." The astronauts froze in disbelief. "Why are you stopping us? It's behind us." The man shook his head slowly. "You still do not understand. You are part of it now." The creature stepped into the chamber, its presence filling the room with icy fear. The soldiers did not fire. They lowered their weapons, their eyes blank. It was clear they were not guards. They were servants. Area 51 was not built to contain the creature. It was built to serve it. The astronauts' hearts sank. The truth was more terrifying than they had imagined. The missions to the moon had not been about exploration or science. They had been about contact, about awakening something that had slept for centuries. The astronauts were not heroes. They were messengers, carrying back the seed of the alien presence. And now, trapped underground, they were to become its vessels. One astronaut cried out, "You used us. You sent us there, knowing what we would find." The man in the black suit did not deny it. He only said, "Humanity has always been watched, always been guided. You only played your role." The creature moved closer, its glowing eyes locking on each astronaut, their minds filled with visions, cities falling, skies burning, ships descending from the stars. It was a future of submission, a future of silence. But even in the face of that vision, a spark of defiance rose. One astronaut stepped forward, gripping the pipe with shaking hands. "We may be weak, but we are human, and humans do not bow." With a cry, he swung, striking the wall panel beside him, sparks flying. The alarms grew louder. The lights burst, smoke filled the air. The others joined him, smashing equipment, breaking control panels, tearing wires. The base shuddered. The hum broke for a moment. The creatures screeched, a sound inside their heads that felt like knives. The soldiers clutched their ears, falling to the ground. The man in the black suit shouted, "No, you fools, you will destroy everything." The astronauts did not stop. Their only weapon was chaos. Their only hope was resistance. The ceiling cracked. Dust rained down. Lights went dark. The creature flickered in and out of vision, its glowing eyes dimming. The astronauts pushed toward a final door, forcing it open with all their strength. Beyond lay a stairwell, leading up toward the surface. They climbed, their muscles burning, their lungs screaming. But the thought of freedom carried them higher. At last, they reached the top. A heavy hatch stood before them. They pushed together. The metal groaned. The desert wind rushed in. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, they felt real air, real night sky, stars stretched above, the same stars that had watched them on the moon. They stumbled into the desert sand, collapsing under the open sky. Behind them, the base shook. A low rumble, like the growl of a dying beast. The hatch slammed shut, locking the secret inside once more. The astronauts lay in the sand, their eyes wide, their hearts broken. They were free, but they were not safe, because they knew the truth. The world would never be told. The files would stay hidden. The experiments would continue. Area 51 was not a prison for them. It was a prison for humanity's future, and the terrifying truth was this: the alien presence had already claimed Earth, silently, patiently. The astronauts had only seen the beginning. As the stars shimmered above, one astronaut whispered, his voice barely audible, "We escaped the gates, but the world is still locked inside them." The others stared at the horizon, knowing he was right. The truth was terrifying, not because of what they saw, but because of what was coming. And, in the silence of the desert, the whispers of the moon still followed them.